Anybody know what that word means, reciprocal of a fraction? Not half. That means you flip it. So if we have this fraction, which is, let me zoom in, 5 over 6x equals 4 over 5. The reciprocal means that you take this fraction and you flip it. So the reciprocal of 5 over 6 is 6 over 5. So when you have a fraction, you want to multiply by the reciprocal. So that's going to give you 30 over 30. And 30 divided by 30 is 1. And then you're going to take your calculator if you need to, multiply 4 times 6, multiply 5 times 5, and leave your answer as a fraction. And choose which one would be the correct answer, A, B, C, or D. So you're going to take 4 times 6. What is 4 times 6? 24. And what's 5 times 5? 25. So your answer would be 24 over 25, which is C. All right, go to page 12 in your note packet. And we're going to continue practicing to find the inverse. So the first thing you want to do, so we're on page 12, is you're going to write it as y equals negative 7x minus 10. That's step number 1. Because f of x is the same as y. And then your next step would be to switch your x and y. So you're going to switch those. So instead of y equals negative 7x minus 10, you're going to write x equals negative 7y minus 10. See how we switched? I switched where my x and my y were. They switched places. So now we need to solve for this, which means we have to get rid of these two numbers. And we're going to do that by doing the opposite. The opposite of subtracting 10 would be to add 10. So let's go ahead and add 10 to both sides. So then that's going to give you, and I'm going to write, well, okay, I feel like I don't have enough space, but it's okay. So that's going to give you x plus 10 equals negative 7y. Go ahead and take this line off because I need more space. And then we're going to get rid of that negative 7. Yes. Yep, we're going to divide everything by negative 7. We're going to divide this fraction, this term by negative 7, this by negative 7, and this by negative 7. So this is your inverse right here. Everything that you see in that yellow highlighted box, that is now your inverse. So we're going to write that using inverse notation. So inverse notation would be f with the little minus 1 of x. So now I'm writing it on the line that I had to erase. So f negative 1 of x equals, and I'm just going to write what you see in that yellow box. So it'll be x over negative 7 plus 10 over negative 7. And that is your inverse function. That's smart. Do the homework right when we do your notes. All right, any questions about that? Okay, so now we're going to do one that has a fraction. So we're going to talk about how do you do that. So again, we start off with y equals x minus 7 over 5. So we're going to start by flipping our x and y. So that would be x equals y minus 7 over 5. That's an ugly 5. Let me make that better. Okay, so whenever you have a fraction, we have to start by getting rid of that fraction. And the way you eliminate a fraction is by multiplying by the number at the bottom, which is 5. So we're going to multiply both sides by 5. And that's going to cancel out the 5. So we're left with 5x, because that's what we have over here. We have 5 times x. Bring down the equal sign. And we just have the y minus 7 left. So now we're almost finished. We got to get that y by itself. So we got to get rid of that minus 7. How do we get rid of the minus 7? What's the opposite of subtracting 7?
Addition.
Adding 7. So let's add 7. So we have 5x plus 7 equals y. And now I'm going to write that in inverse notation, my inverse function. So this here, this is my inverse. This yellow, that yellow box. And we're going to write that with the symbol for inverse. So that would be f with a little minus 1 next to it of x equals, and then 5x plus 7. That is your inverse. Any questions about those two? We're almost finished with 4.2. 4.2 homework is due tomorrow. Almost finished with chapter 4. It's our last test. So if you have an F or a D right now, you really want to make sure you lock in for these last two so you can make sure you get a credit. Okay, so now let's talk about a quadratic. So the inverse of a quadratic. Does anybody know what the opposite of squaring a number is? What's the opposite of squaring a number? Does anybody know? If you look at your calculator, find the x squared key on the calculator. And what is the symbol right above it on the same key? Square root, yeah. So the inverse of a square is called a square root. So how do you get rid of a square? Oops. It is a square root. So let's start by, because remember, there's 3 ways to find the inverse. You can flip the table, you can do it algebraically, or you can graph it. So we're going to do all 3 methods. But the first thing we need to do is fill in this information for the original. So this is my original right here. Y equals x squared. That's my original. Let's go ahead and fill that in. So in your calculator, well, we don't need a calculator. What's 2 times 2? 2 times 2 is what? 4. 1 times 1? 1. 0 times 0? 0. Then 1 times 1 again is 1. 2 times 2 is 4. So that's your y values. And then who remembers how you find the inverse of a table? What do you have to do with the table? We got to flip it, yeah. And that's what we're going to do with this table. So we're going to take all of these numbers, which is my x values, they're now my y values. So that means all of these y values become my x values. So we're going to put these 5 numbers here for x. In the inverse, they switch spots. So that's one way. Now let's do it algebraically. So we're going to take the equation f of x equals x squared and find the inverse. So we're going to start by replacing f of x with y. And then our next step would be to switch our x and y. So let's go ahead and switch those. So instead of y equals x squared, what are we going to write? X equals y squared. And again, the opposite of squaring something is to take the square root. So everything in math has an opposite. The opposite of adding is subtracting. The opposite of multiplying is dividing. When you square a square root, they cancel each other. This and this cancel. So all you're left with is y. So that means that my inverse, f negative 1 of x, my inverse would be, again, my little yellow box, the square root of x. That's my inverse. That's algebraically. All right, and now we're going to graph it. So you still have it. I want you to start off by, and if you don't have 2 separate colors, that's okay. We're going to graph this table, and then I'm going to graph this table. So I'm going to use red and blue. So I'm going to start by graphing this table. It's going to look like a smile. So you can go ahead and graph this table. It should look like a smile. So we're going to put a point at -2. Well, let's start with -2 up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. -1 up 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 4. So this is my original. So this red graph here, that's f of x. So now let's graph the inverse. So I'm going to graph this table. So now I'm going to graph this table, and I'm going to graph mine in blue. So 4, -2, 1, -1, 0, 0, 1, 1, and 4, 2. So let's go ahead and graph that. So x equals 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. It should look like a sideways smile now. X is, oh, it should look like this. That's what the inverse should look like. And then does anybody remember from yesterday, what is the equation that inverses reflect across? Y equals what? Y equals x. Thank you. All right, we got one more question and then we are done for today. You can use the rest of the time to finish homework 2. I am giving extra credit for it today. So let's go ahead and do question G. Again, I got to take this away because I need more space. Okay, so we have our y equals 4x squared plus 36. Then we're going to switch our x and y. And there's 3 things happening. Well, let me switch it first. So that means we have x equals 4y squared plus 36. So I have to get the y by itself. And there's 3 things happening to it. We got a number that's being added. So that means we are going to need to subtract. And then there's a number being multiplied, which means we're going to need to divide. And then it's squared, which means we'll need to take the square root. So we're going to have to do 3 things to get to our inverse. The first thing we're going to do is subtract the 36. So that gives you x minus 36 equals 4y squared. And then we're going to divide everything by 4. Now this number, if you put this in your calculator, oops, I did not mean to erase that. If you put this in your calculator, what is 36 divided by 4? Because that's actually going to give you a whole number. If you're not sure, go ahead, type it in the calculator. 36 divided by 4 is what? 9, yeah. So we end up with x over 4 minus 9. That cancels out, equals y squared. So now the last thing we need to do is get rid of the square. And remember, the opposite of a square is a square root. So I'm going to take the square root of this side and this whole side and make one big roof. So what that gives me is the square root of x over 4 minus 9. And that's going to give me my inverse. Because we did everything to get that y by itself. So when we do that, the answer we're left off with at the end is our inverse. And that would be your final answer. Okay, use this time to work on homework 2. I am giving extra credit for it, and I'm getting ready to pass back papers. Make sure that the papers I pass back, that you actually have a score for it in Skywork, because I try to enter them really fast. Sometimes I might accidentally not enter a score. So just make sure you have that. I will still give full credit up until tomorrow for homework 2.